So I'd like to start this talk by casting our minds back to the turn of the century, back to 2000. So this is what a smartphone looked like in 2000. It's incredibly basic, isn't it? It's easy to forget how different things were back then. And this is what an Apple laptop looked like. I mean, imagine walking into a meeting with one of these today. It looks like a kid's toy. It's almost embarrassing to think about what used to be stylish and cutting edge. And big data, well, big data wasn't really a thing unless you were talking about Star Trek. So things were very different for digital businesses back then. It was very difficult to run large websites. In those days, it was a huge challenge to get the technology in place and create the right kind of software to run a digital business. And if you could achieve that, you had a massive head start on everyone else. Today, that's fundamentally not true anymore. Building a product for the internet is now the easy part. Getting people to understand it and to want to use it, that's the problem we're focusing on now. So psychology is the final frontier. A few years ago, if you wanted to run a psychology experiment, you'd need a lab, you'd need participants, lots of equipment, and you needed to get approval from an ethics committee before you ran a study. So one of the biggest changes we've seen on the internet since 2000 is the fact that it's now incredibly easy to run psychology experiments on your customers at huge scale without them even knowing. So today, the internet is basically one big psychology experiment. All of the components of a web page can be varied and tweaked and served to you to see how you will react, like everything including the wording, the images, the sequencing of steps, the emotiveness of the text, all the way down to the colors of the buttons that you click on. And I'm talking about A/B testing and multivariate testing, of course. So all of this stuff gets tweaked and your behavior gets tracked to find out which design convinces the user to make a purchase, or to, say, share something with their friends, or to do any of the things the business wants them to do. So today we are all being psychologically evaluated constantly by people who want to make money from us. Now, this isn't inherently a bad thing, but there is a big risk that this new power will be used irresponsibly, and that's basically what my talk is about today. So to start off, I'd like you to all join me in a game. Don't worry, you don't have to do anything. It's a thought experiment, so hopefully this will make it a bit more fun. I'd like you to play Let's Pretend. And here's the scenario. Let's imagine that you're a designer. You were trained in visual design in the 1990s, so you're in your 30s now. Times are hard, though. You've recently been let go from your job, but you haven't let that get to you. So you applied for some new jobs, and to your amazement, you got one straight away. You're now head of design at a domain name registration company. And it's called Acme Domains, and here it is. It looks pretty awful, doesn't it? But at least that means they need someone with your skills, doesn't it? So when you get there on your first day, your boss starts to explain it all in your first meeting, and you realise they must have made a bit of a mistake. They don't want you to change the visual design or the logo or the branding, even though it looks cheap and nasty to you. They want you to optimize the website so it makes more money, and they give you a login to the analytics package and the multivariate testing tool. And this is terrifying for you. You thought you were being hired as a visual design lead, but the role is all about statistics and number crunching. And this is actually a common scenario for a lot of designers over the age of 30. Even if you went to a good university, even if you went to a good university to study digital design, this would not have been on the syllabus. So rather than resigning on the spot, you decide to give it a week or two because you need the money. So here is your first task that your boss gives you at your new job. This is the registration form. All customers who want to do anything with your business have to fill in this form, right? And there is a problem here that they want you to fix. Not enough people are answering yes to this question. If people click yes, your company can send them emails, and they can persuade a good percentage of them to buy more stuff. And it also gives your company permission to sell their details to other companies. So how are we going to convince more people to say yes here? What do we do? The sensible thing is to start with some research. So you go onto Amazon and you buy some books. Books about human cognition, books about decision-making and psychology and persuasion. And one particular insight catches your eye. It's a famous study that was carried out in 2003 by two researchers called Johnson and Goldstein looking at organ donation rates across Europe. And there was this really strange pattern that was found where some countries had a high rate and other countries had a low rate. Why was this? Was it cultural taboos? Was it government advertising campaigns or peer pressure? it actually boils down to a very simple difference. In some of the countries, organ donation is opt-in, which means you have to get up off your arse, find a form, fill it in, and sign it to opt in to donate your organs. In other countries, it's the opposite way around. Everyone is an organ donor by default unless you sign an opt-out form. So defaults can be highly effective at influencing consumer behaviour, simply because there's a small amount of friction in switching away from the default. And when you start to look at it, you see defaults are used by businesses everywhere. Here's an example from Adobe. This is the Flash download page. Now, Adobe are predicting that Flash will grow at a rate of about 500 million new installations in the next year. Yeah, that's actually 500 million. I didn't say that wrong. It's a huge number. So, how can they milk this momentum? How can they turn these downloads into revenue? Well, they partnered with McAfee, who pay for every installation of a piece of software called Security Scan Plus that Adobe delivers. And how does Adobe do it? Well, they've simply put a special offer on the Flash download page, and they've set the default to yes, as you can see here. So as a result, they're getting a huge opt-in rate and lots of revenue. It's hard to guess exactly how much money they're making here since they don't publish the information, but considering they're predicting 500 million installations in the next year, this checkbox could possibly be one of the most profitable checkboxes on the entire planet. Of course, Adobe probably see this as a persuasive technique. They see it as a kind way to nudge and encourage users to make an explicit decision to install McAfee. But do you really think that's how people think? As if they're actually going to say, wow, that pre-selected checkbox really changed my mind. I'm so glad I installed that software. In reality, a lot of users will be more along the lines of, huh? What checkbox? In other words, they won't have read the text and they'll have no idea what happened nor what they installed on their computer. And it isn't a very nice piece of software either. This app, McAfee Security Scan Plus, usually shows you an alarming warning like this, which tells you your computer is at risk, and it claims the only way you can fix it is to pay a subscription, which is about $50 a year. Oracle do something very similar with the Java installer. They're another giant company, right? They're setting the bar for everyone else. And they give the Java runtime environment away for free, and they monetize the download by pre-selecting these two checkboxes here. So these checkboxes install a toolbar, and they change the user's search engine to arse.com. And lots of people will leave these boxes ticked without reading or understanding them, which again means lots of money gets made. So the other part of this trick is to make it really easy for a user to get into a situation, but then make it hard for them to get out of it. So installing the arse.com software is basically frictionless. It happens without you ever really asking for it to happen. But if you want to get rid of it, then it's very high friction. There are 10 steps needed to completely remove it from your computer, and they haven't designed it like this by mistake. So the Flash and the Java installers are both great examples of dark patterns. They use manipulation and deception to get people to do things they would not otherwise have done. And there are a lot of other dark patterns out there as well. This is part of the registration form on royalmail.co.uk. This is where they try to get marketing permissions from you. They have 2 rows of checkboxes. The first is tick to opt out, and the second is tick to opt in. Unless you're really concentrating, you won't notice the text that I've highlighted here, so the likelihood of getting caught out is really quite high. What's more, you can use all of the dark patterns I've shown you today without any legal repercussions. So the fact is, there's a real problem with the way most consumer laws assume the human mind works. Most consumer laws assume that we are all totally rational, extremely thorough, and that we read everything word for word. And in classic economics, they call this model the economic man, but it's since been disproven, basically. And the problem is that consumer laws just haven't caught up. The human mind is actually a lot more like Garfield here. Our minds are, by nature, lazy. We avoid unnecessary work, but we do it in a very smart way. And in cognitive science, we call this productive laziness. This isn't a bad thing. It's actually one of our biggest strengths. If you play chess, you don't work out every possible sequence of moves before you take your turn. And when you drive a car, you don't mathematically calculate the stopping distance before you hit the brakes. And when you use Google, you don't read and analyze every single search results before choosing which one to click on. So we make compromises, we satisfy, and we use heuristics to help us cope. To put simply, we cannot be expected to read every sentence we see on the web. We skim read, and dark patterns take this knowledge of this behavior, and dark patterns use it against us. Here's my favourite example of this in action. This is Ryanair. Some of you may have used Ryanair to get here today. If you have, I'm sorry about that. So when you're buying a flight on pretty much any travel site, you'll take it through, say, 10 or 20 pages. And on most pages, they ask you boring but necessary questions. For example, your name at the top there. And this lulls you into a sense of security. All you need to do is answer all the questions, and then you'll eventually complete the purchase, and you can kind of get on with your life. So when you're asked this question here, please select a country of residence, you're probably just going to do as you're told, right? But here's the catch. If you pick a country, you're actually buying travel insurance. To opt out, you need to open up that drop down there, which looks like this, and then scroll down. And cunningly sandwiched between Denmark and Finland is the option, don't insure me. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? It's deceptive by design. They haven't done it like this by mistake. They've recently redesigned their site, and this stayed in there. This relies on the fact that most people skim read web pages. So Ryanair last year, Ryanair had almost 82 million passengers. So the profit from the people who are tricked by this drop-down is probably in the millions of pounds. Historically, designers always used to apply psychology to help people. So if we knew our users were prone to making a certain kind of error, we'd design our interfaces in a way to help prevent those mistakes from happening. So in the 1940s and 1950s, we did this for aeroplane cockpits, for power station consoles, and for medical equipment. And this was called human factors research, and it saved a lot of lives. But nowadays, the flip side has emerged. It's a dark side where our understanding of psychology is applied to take advantage of people and to make money at any cost. And it's tempting to think that maybe only certain kinds of companies do this, but it's not just Ryanair and Adobe and Oracle. They are all at it. So when you look around at your competitors and you see their approaches, you realise the question isn't what design should we use, but where do we stand as a business on the ethical spectrum? So going back to our game of Let's Pretend, let's say you take it to your boss. Let's say you give her a presentation showing her what your competitors are doing, and she says, fine, I want you to A/B test all of them on our site, build all of the options, and then using a sample of a few thousand customers per design, see which one gets us the most opt-ins. Let's be scientific, and let's pick the winner based on how well it performs. So any guesses which one of these will win? Of course, one of the more deceptive ones will win. Right? When it comes to getting people to do something that they don't really want to do, deception is always going to beat honesty. So when you look at your A/B test results from the safety of your dashboard, the results look very hygienic and scientific. And looking at this alone, of course you'd pick the one with the best score. The fact is, this isn't a good representation of reality. It's a single metric, and big decisions shouldn't be based on a single metric. So it starts to become obvious that your company has some problems with its belief system and its values. They don't want to be the most loved company, they want to be the most profitable, even if this means some customers get angry and leave. That's considered a price worth paying, and I personally consider this to be very short-sighted. Anyway, it becomes clear that dark patterns work best when they involve something that's only a minor irritant to each user individually, like a paper cut. Mistakes like signing up to a mailing list, buying $10 of travel insurance with your flight by mistake, or inviting everyone in your contact list to join a social network without realizing it. To the user, these are just minor annoyances, barely worth complaining about, but to the business it's worth a few cents or a few dollars of profit per person. So the customers are thinking at an individual level, but you've got the power of scale behind you. Anyway, back to our game of Let's Pretend. On the one hand, you've got something really icky. You've created something really icky and nasty. So you can see before it was like that, and now it's like the Royal Mail example I showed you. So you don't feel so good about that. But then, on the other hand, as far as your boss and your new company is concerned, you've proven yourself, and you're now a huge success at work. So after your first month in your new job, you get your first paycheck, and you decide to go to buy some furniture to celebrate. IKEA. Now, it turns out IKEA were masters of consumer psychology way before any of these .com businesses existed. So this turns out to be a great field trip for your work. IKEA have got such thin margins on their products. They can't afford you to let you go there and buy just one thing. For them, it's all about the upsell experience. So an IKEA store is essentially a 1 kilometre long tunnel, maybe 2 kilometres in some cases, and you're forced to walk through the entire thing. And to fit that tunnel into a warehouse, they wind the tunnel up into a maze-like structure. And does it work? Yes, massively so. A research group at UCL did some field research. They basically followed shoppers around an IKEA in London, and they did surveys on them as they were leaving. And they found that around 60% of the purchases made in IKEA were impulse buys, things that the shoppers were not intending to buy when they entered the store. And the same researchers also tracked the paths people took through the stores, and they found that people basically, they rarely took any cut-throughs. They generally only followed the big arrows that guide them around the stores. Why? It's because the cut-throughs are hidden. They're usually depicted as fire exits or big industrial doors that are for staff only, that you're not really meant to use. So shopping in IKEA is essentially a trade. In return for their low prices, you trade in an hour or two of your time and you allow them to guide you past almost every single item in their inventory. Did you know there's, psychologists actually have a term called decision fatigue, and it happens to everyone. 2 researchers called Levav and Danzigera did a study of parole board decision-making. As you can see here, a judge, a criminologist, and a social worker met with prisoners to evaluate if they should be released early or not. So there are basically 2 types of ruling in this scenario. Positive is where the prisoner gets their request approved, and negative is where they don't. So these researchers, they looked at 1,000 rulings over 50 days, and they found that the likelihood of a favourable ruling is greater at the very beginning of the workday or after a food break. So time of day is a big determinant in whether or not you get your request approved. And this is really useful to know, by the way, if you ever find yourself in prison. Takeaway from today's talk. So the rationale is that fatigue causes the board to engage with decision-making less as time goes on, and they become more likely to stick with the original sentence that the prisoner received. So they're sticking with the defaults. Then when they take a break and have some food to get their blood sugar up and their energy levels up, they start afresh. Now, on the web, it's extremely easy to engineer decision fatigue, isn't it? We can create an arbitrary number of product options or matrices or steps. It's not like IKEA, who have to build a physical architecture to go with their persuasive architecture. Our persuasive architecture is based on just bits and pixels. It's trivial for us to change it, extend it, branch it, or do whatever we want. So the more you think about it, it starts to become clear that you can take pretty much any kind of psychological weakness and turn it into a dark pattern. And what's more, you can kind of mix and match them and combine them quite easily. There are about 170 different cognitive biases listed on Wikipedia. And a cognitive bias is a flaw in reasoning or judgment that we're all prone to. So each of them is an Achilles heel that allows us to be manipulated. So let's pick a couple here, just as an exercise, and let's create a dark pattern out of them. Let's start with this one. This is scarcity. Scarcity is a mental shortcut that we take. A mental shortcut that basically causes us to perceive greater value in something that's harder to obtain than something that is common, right? And here's another. This is risk adversity under time pressure. So when we've got to make a decision within a limited time, we're less likely to take a risk. Now, if you take these 2 principles and apply them in a dark pattern, you can end up with something that looks like that. Here I am trying to buy some gardening equipment on the Daily Mail's e-commerce store, so they're a big UK newspaper, and when I try to check out, this is what happens. Suddenly, it tells me I've got a limited offer, and I've only got 10 minutes until the offer will be taken away. And it's very easy for me to hit the Buy Now button there, the red button. But if I want to opt out, I have to click that tiny grey Close button on the bottom right, so it's marginally harder. In reality, there's nothing limited about this offer at all. They have plenty of stock. Every time anyone tries to check out on this website, whatever day or time of day, they're all shown this identical screen. The only reason they have a massive countdown timer here is to push you into making a rash decision. So it works, but it's fake scarcity and it's fake time pressure. So it's a nasty dark pattern, and it's very common to see this sort of thing on travel sites as well. Let's try this again for 2 more examples. This is an operant conditioning chamber. It was invented by a researcher called Skinner in the 1950s. The basic idea is that you teach animals to do things by giving them a reward. when they learn a behaviour in response to a stimulus. And Skinner found out that animals learn better when you give them an intermittent reward. So rather than paying out every time they do the learned behaviour, you pay out every now and then. So variable reward schedules are effective at inducing learned behaviour. They are addictive. They're addictive in animals and in humans. And here's another cognitive bias we're going to combine with it. This is gambler's fallacy. This is where we tend to believe that the more we try at something, the more the odds will be in our favour. So how can we combine a variable reward schedule with gambler's fallacy in a dark pattern? Well, this is Candy Crush Saga. 57 million people play it every day. It is the most popular game on Facebook by a wide margin. And in this game, I'm sure you've probably played it, you have to line up three of the same candies in a row to clear them, and it starts off relatively easy and it gets harder. What you don't realise as a player is that the sense of control is just an illusion. It's primarily a game of chance, where you're given rewards on a variable reward schedule, just like Skinner's rats. Now, Candy Crush is unwinnable by design. The final level is designed to be literally impossible. It cannot be completed, and King, the game developers, have admitted this. So to be honest, there are lots of games that have no end state and that are heavily chance-based, and they can be quite fun. So it's not by definition a bad thing, it's just addictive. What I'm about to tell you, though, is the bad thing. So when you lose more than 5 times in a row, which is inevitable, it puts you into timeout, where you can't play again for a few minutes. Unless, that is, you buy more lives, or if you ask your friends on Facebook for help. So this is how they make money, and it's why Candy Crush had such huge viral growth. They're combining the addictiveness of variable rate rewards with gambler's fallacy, and probably a few other dark patterns thrown in there as well. So players can't help believing that if they play just a little bit more, the odds will be in their favour next time. And it's the timeout that's the evil bit. So I know a lot of you in the audience have senior roles in digital businesses. And as you've been listening to these examples, you've probably had some mixed feelings. On the one hand, some of the examples are unforgivable. On the other, you can't help wanting some of the growth and scale that these tricks can offer. So let me just leave you with some sort of parting thoughts. Firstly, it's always possible to make more money if you want to behave like an arsehole. Doesn't mean you should. Secondly, A/B testing platforms present data in a very safe-looking, sanitary and scientific way. Don't be fooled. There's much more to your customers than the graphs that your A/B testing platform spits out. So a lot of campaigning has been going on against tricks like this. This includes darkpatterns.org, the site that I set up a few years ago, this site, and it's been continuing to grow, and the more consumers learn about dark patterns, the more they hate them. Furthermore, consumer laws are gradually catching up, at least for some dark patterns, like this one, for example. This is sportsdirect.com. Here I am trying to buy some walking boots. Let's add them to my basket. And here I am checking out, but wait a minute, what's that? The item in the second row there, what's that? I didn't add that. So they've gone and sneaked in an item into my basket behind my back. It's a magazine and a mug for £1. £1 is perfectly priced, isn't it? If it arrives, it's barely worth complaining about. It's barely worth sending back. The good news is that this trick is now illegal in the UK. It will be in every EU country until it's been, once this has been fully enacted. If your business uses this trick in the UK, the customer can ask for a refund now. Well, this is since June this year. They can ask for a refund on the entire order, and they get to keep the goods, which is a nice step in the right direction, but to be honest, it's only a first step. If you insist on using dark patterns, you'll need to be constantly watching consumer laws as they evolve and catch up with the tricks that you're using. So, to be honest though, an appetite for change can't be forced upon you. It has to come from within. Your brand has a personality, and that personality is defined by you and the way you encourage your company and your staff to act. Do you want your customers to just use your brand? Because personally, I think usage alone is weak. People often use things they hate because it's cheap, and that doesn't put you in a strong position. A good brand is liked. A great brand is loved and respected. And this is where longevity happens. This is where you get to deliver real value. A great brand becomes a lifelong friend or part of the family. And I hope that today I've shown you that You'll never reach that point if you use dark patterns. Dark patterns are powerful, they're easy, and they're very tempting, but they'll never put your brand in a good place. So thanks very much, everyone. Seems to have got through that really quickly.